This is a relay project.
Real Talk starts right now. Here's Ryan Jesperson.
It's Monday, September 11th. We welcome you to this episode of Real Talk. It's sort of one of those dates that jumps off the calendar, isn't it? To state the obvious, anytime it's just not your average Monday or Tuesday, Wednesday, whatever it is, on whatever year it is. Anytime you say September 11th, I don't know, my brain just goes back to that day in 2001. I know I'm stating something obvious. I know I'm not the only one, but every year, even though it's not one of these, what do you say, sort of like monumental anniversaries, unless you're one of the families, unless you're a New Yorker, unless you're a firefighter or a first responder, unless you still think about it, right? It's not the first year after, it's not the 10th or the 25th, but 22 years after September 11th, 2001, I still find myself remembering about that morning. Probably the same as you, right? Probably the same as those the generation before would think of, December 6th, for example, or you think of these dates through history where something happened, whether it was an attack on America at Pearl Harbor, or whether it was D-Day, or whether it was one of those big moments. There are these certain specific dates that just jump out at us and prompt reflection. And I think that's a good thing. We won't spend all show talking about that today, but in just a quick second, I'll ask Charles Adler what he remembers about that. I don't think in all the years that I've been talking to Adler on and off camera, so to speak, as pals, colleagues, and otherwise, I don't know that he and I have ever talked about September 11th. I don't remember what his memory was on that day. He would have been obviously broadcasting coast to coast. We'll find out in a second. We'll take a look today at the Conservatives' National Convention. Quebec City played host to Canada's Conservatives over the weekend. Now, you know how conventions go. They want to talk policy. This is the grassroots way, the delegates' way of coming in and saying, here's what we want the party to be all about. Here's the message that we want to send to Canadians, both our current supporters and our could-be, maybe would-be supporters. But what message did Canada's Conservatives send? We'll get into that, and then we try to do this at least once a month. We're going to get into our Real Talk mailbag today. So if you're Gerald, who wrote in, letting us know that Angus Reid was asking the wrong questions, the polling firm, Jackie Rae joined us last week, says Angus Reid asked the wrong question about parents' rights or parents' right to know, to be informed by schools about their kids' pronouns. Gerald thinks that we needed to hit that from a different angle. We'll get to that. And Lauren, who thinks that my conversation about merit-based hiring and women in broadcasting in particular missed a certain something. We'll get to Lauren's take on that. We'll find out what Brian thought about our David Parker interview. Believe it or not, we're still getting emails. I'm not talking about hanging on to a bunch of old emails. I'm saying we're still getting emails, including over this past weekend, about my one-on-one with the founder, the leader of that Take Back Alberta movement, and Curtis, who wrote in to talk about Canada's housing crisis. Spoiler alert, I'll let you know that Curtis's email has already translated into a Real Talk Roundtable. That's coming up this Friday. We're going to talk about Canada's housing crisis. You already know that if you subscribe to our weekly email, which is in your inbox as of this morning, and you can subscribe at the bottom of the page at ryanjesperson.com. Adler in 30 seconds, but first wanted to let you know that this episode of Real Talk is presented by Rello. Back to school season, definitely not just for the kids. If you've been feeling stuck or unsatisfied in your job, now is the perfect time to go back to school for a new career. Why not launch a rewarding career in real estate with Rello's affordable online courses? Their courses make it easy to pass your exam and get your real estate license so you can run your own business, set your own hours, and be your own boss. The earning potential is unlimited, and you'll be helping people every single day as they buy or sell their homes. Now, the best thing about Rello is how committed they are to your success. Live instructors host online exam prep sessions every Saturday. They've got a whole bunch of resources to help you launch your business well after you've passed the exam and gotten licensed. And there's a great special right now for Real Talkers. Right now, you can save 20% on any Rello course with the code REALTALK. That's one word, REALTALK at Rello, RELO.ca. For decades, Charles Adler's been a known name across the country as he has driven and hosted conversations, common sense conversations about issues that matter. He's an Emmy winner. He's an RTDNA Lifetime Achievement winner, and he joins us the first episode of every week here on Real Talk. Chuck, what do you remember personally, professionally, about September 11th, 2001? Where were you?
I was in Winnipeg, and I remember it as being a very, very somber day because at that point, regardless of what the numbers were in terms of casualties in Pennsylvania, in Washington, and of course, most of them in New York City, we had no idea where this was going. We had no idea whether this attack on what appeared to be, of course, the United States of America, whether there were going to be similar attacks on Britain, France, Germany, Canada, perhaps. But we didn't know whether or not this would actually, at some point, become a world war, because there was no doubt in my mind that the United States was going to respond. It was just a matter of how it would respond, how widely it would respond, and how many countries. Clearly, it was a terrorist attack, but terrorists are based in several countries, mostly the Middle East, and it was an open question at that point. But I think what I'd like to talk about right now is there was no doubt in anybody's mind that this was extremely serious. This was life-changing. This would affect all our lives, whether we lived in the city, country, Canada, Europe, United States, of course, or anywhere else. It was a world event, and it was the most colossal event that was happening in real time right before our eyes. And most of us thought that all the fluff that was, I guess, filling up talk shows, TV, radio, whatever, the Kardashian kind of stuff, we thought all of it would disappear because we just didn't think that anybody would be in a mood for filler, for low protein, empty communications. And we thought that would be the case for a long time. It was just a question of how long. But some of us at the time, I remember we were talking about democracy, that democracy was at stake, and that most of us felt there was a consensus that we would have to give authorities more authority.
Right.
That doesn't mean an authoritarian state, but we felt that liberal democracies like Canada would end up exercising more power. The central authority would exercise more power over all of us, especially in terms of what we were doing on social media, because there was no question that some of these people were radicalized on social media, and we saw social media at the time, that's 22 years ago, we saw social media as a potentially dangerous thing, and I don't think we were wrong about that.
Yeah, no kidding. How would you, you look back, and I was talking to a friend the other day just about how drastically different flying on an airplane is, the flying experience, and that is directly linked, obviously, sure, to 9/11. There have been some kind of learnings that only happen over time. You remember how, I remember George W. Bush, president at the time, that, and by the way, well, maybe we can talk about Rudy Giuliani in just a bit. I mean, remember Giuliani 22 years ago versus now, unreal. But I remember 22
years ago, we took Giuliani very seriously.
He's a hero.
He's a bozo. He's a drunken clown. I mean, it's just, yeah. I've never seen in my lifetime, I've never seen a person go from the penthouse to the outhouse like Rudy Giuliani.
Yeah, so well said. One of the most impressive impromptu sort of ad lib political responses I've ever seen. I remember George W. Bush standing on this wreckage, on this rubble. There were still efforts underway to, the workers were still there where the towers had stood. Everybody remembers it, yeah. And the president of the United States is there, and he's talking to the people, and he's talking to the nation, obviously. And you remember one of those rescue workers, whomever it was, sort of shouted and said, "We can't hear you." And you remember the president said, "Well, I can hear you." And he said, "And pretty soon the whole world's going to hear us." And of course, everyone just erupted. So there was this sort of, I don't know the right word. I mean, it's not enthusiasm because people were devastated, obviously, but there was this sense. Remember this sense, we're going to get the bastards. We're going to get the bastards that did this.
Yeah, and I was one of them. I was, go get them now. And I remember specifically feeling this was radical Islam.
Yeah.
And if we had to, if the United States had to, if Canada as an ally had to, if we actually had to go to the center of Islam, which is Saudi Arabia, of course, we would have to do that. And there was no doubt in my mind that if we had gone into Saudi, this would have been a much wider war. And I also had no doubt at the time that what would stop us from going to Saudi, whether we like it or not, even though it was 9/11, even though all of us were thinking about the firefighters, the police, the civilians, all of it, we couldn't help but feel that if we had taken revenge in Saudi Arabia, the price of oil would go to, whatever, $150 or $200 a barrel. And that would cause an instant recession, if not depression. And I felt it, and I remember sharing this with folks across the country, that this would stop us. For those people who are worried that this takes us to Saudi Arabia, it likely won't happen just because of a basic self-preservation. We're not going to shoot ourselves in both feet and the heart in order to make the point. We'll find another place, another territory somewhere in the Middle East to make the point.
Yeah, exactly. And so, you cut to present day and you have people maybe going, these, and I'm not here to say Saddam Hussein has this shining legacy and should be remembered as a hero. Hardly and far from. But the for the average civilian, for the average person, there was kind of this minimum standard. There was almost like this trust in Western governments that if intelligence showed that this was what we needed to know, or we had what we needed to know, believe us, we've got it. Believe us, the intelligence suggests that this is it. Then let's shell the hell out of these guys. And looking back in retrospect, Iraq obviously not the right target.
That Iraq thing was a dumb idea, and at the time I was a soldier. I'm not talking about literally a soldier, but I felt I needed to be a soldier for our cause.
Sure.
And I, supported, what the Allies were doing. And of course that included Iraq, but I just had trepidations when Dick Cheney went on, I guess it was Meet the Press or one of the Sunday shows, and said that the Arabs in Baghdad would be greeting American troops with flowers. I just threw my hands up and I said, this thing is likely a fraud. This thing is going to end really, really badly.
So now you cut to present day, and today, September 11th, because the date jumps off the calendar, people will talk about it and remember it. Yeah. People around water coolers will say, where were you, or what do you remember about it? They'll have conversations similar to ours. But the only other time that I've seen 9/11 invoked, or the Saudis tied to 9/11, obviously and in plain sight, has been over the last 18 months or so with the PGA and the Live Golf Tour, and some of the comments from Monahan, the PGA's leader, and saying, when have you ever had to apologize for being a fan or for playing on the PGA Tour? People talk about the Saudis and sports washing, the trend that we're seeing with that. And honestly, for people that love Live and love where golf is going and they're fans of the game, it's people still, and I'm not trying to turn this into some sort of an indictment of millions of golf fans everywhere, but people still are kind of it seems like enough time has passed, or for whatever reason, people keep giving Saudis a pass. When's the last time you saw a Canadian outraged that the government of Canada is selling armored vehicles to the Saudis? It's nobody cares.
No. Time either time heals or time gives people amnesia. But I don't want to get into Grandpa Chuck time here, but it's impossible for me to forget how many people I knew in my real life growing up as a child who said they would never buy a Volkswagen, or they would never buy a Mercedes, or they would never buy a knife or anything made in Germany. My God, that was consensus. And it was also consensus among my friends, my cousins, because I've got lots of kin in the United States, which is where we were supposed to end up. That's a whole other story. But the point is, I always had a strong connection to the United States. And of course, I worked there for a number of years. But in the United States, the antipathy toward buying Japanese motorcycles and Japanese cars. And, once again, I know I'm sounding like Grandpa Chuck here, because for someone in 2023 to say, wait a minute, people actually were serious about not buying products like cars, like what BMWs and Mercedes Benzes from Germany or Toyotas from Japan, or they couldn't be serious. They were deadly serious because it was based upon their memory of World War II. And as far as they were concerned, the Japanese and the Germans were responsible for the war. And I mean, I could make the case that they were responsible for the war, but that's not the point here. The point is that Ryan Jesperson is saying that memories fade. And of course, in the ashes of 9/11, if anyone had said that the PGA would take itself to the next level by combining with the Saudis, I mean, you would have been told that you were nuts. That was 22 years ago. And so that conversation about not dealing with the Saudis in this way is so 22 years old. And anything that's, more than 10 days before our first iPhone is considered the Flintstones. It's the Stone Age.
Yeah, it's hard for me to sort of wrap my mind around that 22-year passage of time. And if you look at where we are now with 9/11 22 years ago, in 9/11, 22 years before that, you would have been looking at 1979. You're talking about, the Soviet-Afghan war, the Soviet Union invades Afghanistan, Iranian students crowding the U.S. embassy in Tehran, the Iran hostage crisis. I mean, 22 years is a generation, right? I mean, it's like there are people right now, young people in university today that have no memory of it.
Brian, sorry, I didn't mean to interrupt. I want to bring in something that's specific and political, and there's blood on my hands here, so this is not me trying to whitewash history or whitewash my own history. I was very much a supporter of George W. Bush and what they were doing. Yes, I had trepidations, especially, like I say, Dick Cheney's remarks about the flowers and Colin Powell's, I thought, bizarre presentation to the United States, where it almost sounded to me like, Powell had been brainwashed. It was disconcerting. But putting all of that aside, I was a supporter. I was also a supporter of the Canadian Conservative Party. That's the same party that's around today. I don't want people to pretend that I was supporting a different party. I was supporting the same party that's there today. I've got my grievances with them, but I want to put that aside for a moment. I was supporting George Bush, and I was supporting the idea of you're with us or you're against us, okay? Yes, of course, it was the ashes of 9/11 that made me do what so many people around the world did, including the great Tony Blair, and that is put our arms around George Bush and have him as the leader of this movement and the leader of the free world against terrorism. It was the war on terror. I had no trouble with the idea of that phrase, the war on terror. But the point is that Jean Chrétien was the prime minister, and I have to give credit where credit is due. Jean Chrétien kept our kids out of Iraq. Stephen Harper was very much for joining the coalition and going into Iraq. I supported Harper, and I supported that. I will regret that for the rest of my life, and I will always be thankful that my guy was not in charge. My guy was not in the PMO. That it was Jean Chrétien. I just want to put things into context with 2023, because whether it's the Conservative Convention a couple of days ago or so many conversations that take place, I'm always hearing this. Stephen Harper was the greatest. Stephen Harper was the best. If only we had Stephen Harper. I was a Stephen Harper supporter 100%. But there's always a big fat but. I'm thankful that Stephen Harper was not prime minister on 9/11.
I wonder what it would have looked like if Donald Trump was president on 9/11.
Wow.
Yeah?
I'm going to, I don't know how you're going to take this, but I think 9/11, I think Donald Trump might not have gone into the Middle East. I think Donald Trump might have. I know that sounds crazy. Donald Trump is seen as, loose cannon, and he wants to have wars and stuff like that. The truth is, I'm not a Trump supporter. I mean, everyone knows that. But Donald Trump did not start wars. Donald Trump, look at the Donald Trump track record as far as going into, foreign entanglements. It's crystal clear that he's not one of them. I mean, he was the one who arranged to end Afghanistan. I don't like the way Afghanistan ended, but that's besides the point. I don't think that Donald Trump necessarily. I think Donald Trump definitely would have ordered serious attacks, whether they were with special forces or drones, on specific terrorists. I'm not sure that Donald Trump would have gone into Afghanistan, and I'm not sure that Donald Trump would have gone into Afghanistan to fight the Taliban if he didn't have the support of Pakistan. So I wouldn't leap to the conclusion that that 9/11, had Donald Trump been the president, would have resulted in World War III. I'm not a fan of Trump, but I'm also not a fan of hysteria.
Catamus Rex in our live chat says, well, Trump's also said we have nukes. Why don't we use them? Others are saying, ACAT says Trump wouldn't have been president on 9/11 because his image was assisted by his show The Apprentice, which didn't air till 2005. Sure. I saw that you shared the video. This is one of the more mind-boggling clips that I've ever heard of Trump, which says a lot. Remember, he called into News 9 in New York City. As 9/11's unfolding, he calls in, and they take him then as the billionaire property developer, obviously a huge property holder in Manhattan at the time, talking about how 40 Wall Street, one of his buildings, had been the tallest tower in Manhattan before the Twin Towers were built. He goes, and he's talking. It's unnerving how he's talking about it, just like emotionally so detached. Almost not emotionally. It's almost like just like a social, just an inability to feel. There's like a blocker. There's like a block.
Donald Trump has no empathy. That's why
Zero.
I think him as dangerous, regardless of what I said about 9/11. A person with no empathy should never be in charge of anything. A union, a company, a country. I mean, people without empathy. Are scary.
So in his clip, he's saying he's going 40 Wall Street. He goes, 40 Wall Street. So it was the tallest building in Manhattan before the towers. It was the second tallest building, and now again, it is the tallest building in Manhattan. And you're like, what? Like
I was watching.
The fires are still burning.
I'm not saying I was watching it live because I wasn't watching that particular channel, but I saw that clip several times, and I thought to myself, I mean, this is the king of jerks. And of course, this was before Celebrity Apprentice. But if someone had told me on that day, just like if someone had told me on that day that someday the PGA would take itself to the next level by joining with Saudi capital, I would have said you're crazy. And if someone had told me that this guy who just bragged about his building being the tallest because the tallest building had been destroyed and thousands of people have been killed. If someone had told me that this guy is going to be a national TV star someday, I'd say you got to be crazy. This guy is, off the wall, zero empathy, monster. Get him out of my face.
I appreciate this from the Twitter account Purple High Tops, who says, hey, a lot of us are angry and are vocal about Canadian arms deals with the Saudis, Jespo. I appreciate that person chiming in. You can always, of course, hit us up with our hashtag RealTalkRJ. I'm talking to Charles Adler. So you say, right now, the Conservatives have been your party, and right now you got some issues with them. You don't hide that. You talk about it often. I would imagine you were paying at least relatively close attention to what went down in Quebec City over the weekend as Canada's Conservatives hosted their annual convention. I know a bunch of people personally that were there. What were some of the sort of the key moments that jumped out at you over the weekend? There's lots to talk about for sure.
Well, I thought that Poilievre delivered a great speech overall.
Yeah.
And Mulroney was one of those people who commented. Mulroney even said that, Mulroney was a bit self-effacing. It took himself out of the situation, but said that in his mind, the greatest Conservative speech delivered at a convention. It was a very, very effective speech. It was well put together. Yes, I disagree with some of the points. I honestly do not understand why Poilievre's Conservatives still have to play this violin about rescuing the children and that the school systems are trying to enable pedophiles and groomers and cutting children up and stuff. All that QAnon stuff that the U.S. right wing is so crazy about. I mean, when you're leading in the polls like this, but most important, when you're leading in two specific areas, you've got the number one issue in the country, affordability, where the Conservatives are off the charts ahead of the Liberals. Okay, that's on the number one issue, and then of course on the issue of who do you want as Prime Minister, Poilievre is now well ahead of Justin Trudeau. When you're leading in those categories, why do you have to go to the peanut gallery? Why do you have to do this social conservative stuff? I understand the business part of it. you're a rural-based party. That's still where you have the most amount of enthusiasm. That's still where you're getting most of your money. And those people are all jacked up about this idea that parents have got to take the country back, take the schools back, all that David Parker stuff you mentioned a few moments ago, Ryan, that you're still getting lots of reaction to David Parker. So I understand all of that, but I'm just talking macro here. I'm talking about history. We're talking about 9/11 today. Historically speaking, the Conservative Party, if it stays with an economic focus, of what I would call a common sense focus on affordability, they are now well ahead of the Liberals. And if they don't stray into these other areas, they don't give the Liberals an opportunity to portray the Conservatives as, let's just say it the way people on the street would say it, as kind of a cheap version of the American Republicans. And I know that doesn't matter in some parts of Western Canada, but I focus on where the battlegrounds are, in the suburbs of Toronto and the suburbs of Vancouver, and the suburbs of Montreal, of course, and Atlantic Canada. There's no need to become a cheap version of the U.S. Republicans for the Conservatives to win in 2 years.
Well, not only no need, but it's just a stupid move strategically, right? And I would just say, we had a great conversation with Jackie Rae last week, the president of Angus Reid, the polling firm, obviously known across the country, and she said, when you're looking at polling, their polling that suggests that twice as many Canadians polled, they obviously didn't talk to 40 million of us, but twice as many polled say that they see Poilievre as the better option for prime minister over Trudeau. And so we dig into this, and I say, what do you make of this? And she goes, these are the facts. And I thought she did a great job of breaking it down. But she also said, this isn't like a ringing endorsement of Poilievre as much as it is an indictment of Trudeau.
It's basically saying that the people are saying, and the people have this feeling, and it doesn't matter why the feeling is there, and you can analyze it to death, but sometimes analysis becomes worthless. It is what it is. Trudeau's best buy date has expired. Okay, so you love that milk, sour cream, whatever it is you have in the fridge, but
not yogurt that lasts forever.
Okay, but the fridge is going to get a little stinky if you don't get the cold cuts and the milk out of there, because it's been there for too long. And Trudeau's got to find a way of doing Trudeau 2.0, because Trudeau 1.0, the shelf life is, as I say, gone. That's what you're seeing here. So when people say that they'd rather have Poilievre than Trudeau, it's not like people are dancing in the streets. There is no Poilievre mania, but you don't have to have Poilievre mania. People are ready for a change. I just don't. Once again, I don't want to be a broken record of this. I just don't understand why the Conservatives have to do a David Parker routine to win. Frankly, let's take it right to Alberta. Let's take it right to your doorstep, Ryan. Do you honestly believe that Danielle Smith needed to do a David Parker routine for the UCP to remain in government?
Well,
seriously,
there's two conversations to be had, and live chat is coming alive here, which is great to see. Alyssa, for example, says nobody's going to talk about Poilievre's wife delivering a speech. Anita Poilievre spoke at the convention. She says she is no longer off limits as family. I would suggest that the spouse of a leader is never off limits and would never be treated as off limits. But she did speak as well. But I want to bring this back for a quick second to say that whether you're talking about Danielle Smith appealing to David Parker or whatever, or Aaron O'Toole making some of the sort of what seemed to be uncharacteristic comments from the O'Toole playbook a few years back when he was seeking the Conservative leadership, same as Pierre Poilievre now, there's the person campaigning for party leadership, and then there's the person campaigning for premier or prime minister. And to bring this back to the point of what Shachi said about Poilievre, double polling Trudeau on best PM and all this kind of stuff, is like the number one playbook right now is keep going with what works. And pardon my French, but don't fuck up the other stuff. And so right now, if you look at the biggest momentum that the Conservatives are gaining, it's easy. It's simple to identify. It's going to be the fodder for our Real Talk Roundtable this Friday. It's the housing crisis, affordability.
And
people care more. Chuck, Canadians care more, and this is polling. Okay,
this is
Canadians care more about the housing crisis than they do about the opioid crisis. They care more about housing than they do about, for example, the climate, about environment, about climate change. That's what Canadians are saying. So you got to send the message to the grassroots, but some will not be swayed because they never have been and never will be, that now is not the time to obsess over things like, what do you want to call it? Like gender-affirming medical care for teens, or now is not the time to obsess over things like trans women in bathrooms. But people want to sink their teeth into that stuff at convention because convention is when the grassroots gets to have a say. Unfortunately, it's also one of the biggest platforms when you send a message to the rest of the country, including those who are the voters you hope to attract.
Well, you've said it extremely well. The grassroots love this stuff, but let's just talk about something that actually matters, okay? And nobody's going to be called a pedo or a groomer for saying this. Food and shelter matter. Mm-hmm. Food is still an issue because the price of food is an issue, and shelter is an issue not just because there's a lack of supply in many cases, but what there is too expensive, and the interest rates are making it really expensive. Some people who have to renew their mortgages are finding out that it's really bad news bears, as we used to say. So, I mean, I've told politicians this over the years, whether they're liberals or conservatives. Look, guys. When food and shelter is an issue and food and shelter are not on your side, you can expect to lose unless you do something dramatic, because food and shelter are always, people talk about healthcare and climate, they're all important. But in terms of the real world that people live in, if their food and or shelter is in jeopardy, you're in jeopardy.
Ken on the live chat says, Mr. Adler, they don't have to do these things. That's simply who most of the party is now. Ken says, I was a PC, a progressive conservative supporter as well, says we are political orphans, sir. Do you get that sense from convention?
Well, yeah, for sure. Because, I was one of those, Mulroney talked about how this was a great, I was one of those people who rooted for the Conservatives, voted for the Conservatives, and really enjoyed some of those conventions. But when I'll just use the David Parker term because it works for this conversation. When they go David Parker on me at a national convention, they lose me. Yeah, and it does make me feel like an orphan. But from a pragmatic point of view, I don't see the point. All Poilievre has to do between now and the next go, whether it's next year or the year after that, is be prime ministerial. Every day when he looks in the mirror, he should just say, okay, today I am going to go through this day as if I were the prime minister, not as a click whore, looking for the most amount of clicks, looking for the most amount of controversy, looking to own the libs and all that kind of stuff that I enjoy doing, because I know he enjoys doing it. But no, today I'm not going to be a click whore. I'm going to be a prime minister. If he does that, it's going to be very difficult to beat him.
Yeah. I'm referencing CTV's reporting on the convention. They said the Conservative Party's first openly transgender candidate, former Aaron O'Toole policy advisor, Hannah Hodson, spoke with CTV. Hannah left the party after Poilievre won the leadership, said that she was ashamed to see the party decide to focus on attacking some of the most vulnerable people in Canada. Quote, when there are so many important things to deal with as a country. Hodson saying that her concern now is how this will play out, with Liberals and NDP likely to pounce on these policies as a culture war wedge issue. We talked about that with Shachi last week. If you missed it, make sure you check it out. Melissa Lantsman, deputy leader for the Conservatives, out herself, told our friend Vashi Capello, says that she wrote that for the conservative movement to grow, support for LGBTQ2S plus people cannot be up for debate. Said, quote, what I will say is the Conservatives believe in the dignity of every single Canadian, no matter where you come from, and that nothing Poilievre has said will make her question that. The message has to land.
However, she can make the case that nothing Poilievre has said, but it's what Poilievre chooses not to say. Poilievre has got to find an opportunity at some point to say to the people who do want to harm LGBT, he has to find an opportunity to say, not in my Canada, not in my party. He's got to find a way to do that, because if he doesn't, this will affect him. And culture wars, no matter How many people talk about only the basic issues matter? And, as I've said a few moments ago, food and shelter matters. They're also looking for majority. If you're looking for that majority, then you've got to listen to what Landsman is saying. LGBT is very much a part of the country. And to still go, I hear some, sort of, let's just call them right-wing nut job conservatives, the ones I never got along with, who keep saying, Chuck, you don't understand, the real LGBT community is less than 10%. Even if that's the case, okay, let's just take that number, 10%. Those 10% have friends. Those 10% have fathers and mothers. And if your child, if your brother, if your sister, if your father or mother is LGBT, and these assholes are bashing him day and night publicly at conventions, never mind what they're doing privately, and the leader, Pierre Poilievre, who's supposed to have moral authority, if he doesn't talk back to that, you've got a problem.
Charles Adler joins us the first episode of every week right here on Real Talk. He's the host of the Charles Adler Show. Make sure you subscribe to his podcast. And, of course, you can follow him on X, on Twitter, at Charles Adler. It's nice to see you, pal.
Thank you, Ryan.
Some of the other, and again, let us put this out to you, Real Talkers. You know where to find us, talk at ryanjesperson.com. A ton of emails last week. I don't know. It's fantastic. We thought, back to school, y'all are onto this stuff. Knowing that this can be the home for meaningful debate on issues that matter. What jumped out at you over the weekend? I see someone in live chat, apologize, I didn't see it, was saying, where are all the progressive conservatives? Where are all those people speaking out? Had a really interesting conversation with a friend over the weekend. He's a little bit older than me, and he was a significant player in the progressive conservative, let's say in the later years of the dynasty in Alberta, as a behind-the-scenes person, as an advisor and a senior person now working in lobbying, and sort of said, kind of gets the sense in Western Canada, maybe in Alberta, he gets the sense that a lot of the people that came up through the, maybe the Lougheed years, but the Getty years for sure, the Klein years for sure, and then, Stelmach and everybody else that followed, Hancock and Redford and everybody, them, like, they kind of, in his words, got the sense that they had done the work, like that their time was done, and that now is the time for the new generation. It's a lot of work. It's a lot of work to get elected and to stay elected. It's a lot of work to keep all the constituency associations in walking, in lockstep and staying focused and staying disciplined and keeping that party where it needs to be. And I said, well, what do you think about who it's falling on to do the work? And he says, well, the people that are most willing to do the work are the people that are going to control the direction of the party. And so unless you have a loud voice or a significant portion of that party base, that membership that says, hey, it seems like the door is open for us now, talking about the federal conservatives, it seems like we've got a real opportunity to win back government. It seems like we got a real opportunity to make Pierre Poilievre the next Prime Minister of Canada. So how do we make sure that happens? And what are some of the pitfalls that we have to avoid? Unless you're committed and feeling conviction at a grassroots level that there are things that just politically, strategically aren't smart to wade into, then, well, you're going to deal with those consequences. So we'll see. Still 2 years away from an election, but if you're not going to talk about it on a show like this, where are you going to talk about it? Some of the other things that maybe jumped out over the weekend, Poilievre talked a lot about safety, talked about bail reform, talked a lot about whether or not they need to build new jails. He doesn't think they do. He thinks that the bail reform angle is one that probably needs the biggest focus. I'd probably be inclined to agree with him there. He talked about gun ownership. He talked about reversing bans on hunters and licensed sport shooters. He said that the government, under his leadership, would sue, in his description, corrupt pharmaceutical companies that profited from lying about the dangers and addictiveness of opioids that have caused hell on our streets. He said that conservatives would offer treatment, not decriminalized and tax-funded drugs, which, of course, is where the conservatives and the liberals would perhaps be most at loggerheads on that file, believing that the conservatives do detox options would be more important than things like supervised consumption services. We've debated that and talked about that a lot on this show. He believes that we need to rebuild our military at home. He said that we need to repeal Trudeau's censorship laws and restore freedom of speech on Canadian campuses. That's a little red meat for the base for sure. And whatever that means, whatever that would translate into, the federal government setting policy for universities, I don't know. We've seen hints at that in past. Conservative politicians at provincial and federal levels talking about funding for post-secondary institutions and how funding could be impacted in either direction by the stance or even the tone that a post-secondary institution takes or sets when it comes to so-called free speech. Again, culture wars being fought right here in Canada. I know I keep saying it, but if you missed our conversation last week with Jackie Rae, we get into that as well, and I encourage you to check that out. Want to get to some more of your thoughts in our live chat and some of the emails. We're going to get into the Real Talk mailbag in just a quick second, but I wanted to let you know that if you live in and around Edmonton, you're invited tomorrow to the Inflation Cafe. This is kind of an interesting initiative that's hosted by Civic Service Union 52, CSU 52. You can find them online at edmontonforeveryone.ca from 11:30 in the morning to 1 in the afternoon at Churchill Square, right outside City Hall, which is definitely not an accident. Tomorrow, they're going to be hosting an Inflation Cafe pop-up, and the first 200 people that show up there are going to receive a complimentary lunch from the members of CSU 52 with a twist. It's going to be a unique demonstration to show the effects of inflation and provide a platform for open dialogue about the challenges that community members are facing due to rising living costs. You'll hear from CSU 52 members, community leaders, and concerned Edmontonians directly impacted by the current economic challenge. Again, 11:30 to 1 tomorrow. That's Tuesday, September 12th at Churchill Square. It's Inflation Cafe. Free lunch for the first 200 who show up. That's presented by Civic Service Union 52. At Friesen Brothers, we were teasing it all last week, letting you know we're going to be talking about the Alberta Beef Roundup. Well, it is back. You can learn details at friesen.com. It's a tradition that Friesen Brothers has maintained since 1955. And this year they've got two options: a custom cup whole hip. This is a custom-cut whole hip. It weighs like 70 pounds. And a 50-pound freezer pack featuring the finest Alberta beef. So they take their skilled butchers at Friesen Brothers. They handle all the cutting and wrapping in-store just the way your family likes it. You can go custom. And this event lasts for just 2 weeks every year, okay? So you can check it out online. Friesen.com/beef roundup is where you'll find it. Friesen Brothers is Alberta-grown and Alberta-owned. If you're a professional engineer, if you got your PEng anywhere in Canada, Apex Automation wants to hear from you. They're looking to hire electrical engineers, instrumentation engineers, those of you that are professionals in computer science, process or mechanical engineers, also electricians and instrument technicians. They're building a well-rounded team that can deliver turnkey projects for their clients. They know that nobody can do that on their own. It takes a team, and that's why Apex Automation has made such a commitment to that. They test drive everything, every system before it's put into place. They bring their clients into their Apex headquarters right here in Edmonton to make sure that before these automation systems are installed and ready to go on site, everybody understands what's going on. This is a company that operates a little bit different than its competitors, and it shows, including the value they put on their people ahead of their profits. You can learn more, including checking out the careers link at apexautomation.ca. And we're putting out a shout out to decision makers, whether you work for a municipality somewhere in Alberta and Saskatchewan, whether you own a business or simply are in charge of operations. If garbage and recycling contracts come across your desk, you're going to want to make sure you check out localenvironmental.ca. A lot of people might think, well, it's just garbage, but not them. They believe that communities deserve better, and that includes better service, better prices, and more support for local causes. So if, for example, you're working out of Edmonton or Whitecourt or Regina, and you're looking for a full-service environmental solutions partner, find out why Local has established itself as the most trustworthy name in waste management. You can learn more about their services and get a quote by checking out localenvironmental.ca. What do you remember about September 11th, 2001? Were you working morning radio at that time, or?
No, I was actually still living in Ontario. I was thinking about that this morning. I remember I was sleeping in. It was, a weekday, obviously, and I I remember my stepdad at the time coming down and shaking me awake violently around 9 a.m. Because, we're on the same time zone as New York. And he said, they're bombing us. I remember those words specifically. They're bombing us. And I said, what? And he said, get up and look at the TV. At that time, of course, internet wasn't as prevalent.
Yeah. No social media really at that time.
And I just remember that one shot of the tower they were staying on CNN, on every news channel. And we were watching CNN. But as I learned more, I kind of got what he was saying, not they're bombing us, but just we didn't know anything, right?
Yeah.
But we obviously knew when that second plane hit that this was not a mistake. But it was interesting because I was watching some of the footage over the weekend of how people thought it was an accident at first when the first plane had hit, right?
Yeah.
A low-flying plane, possibly
that, right?
running out of fuel, possibly trying to land in the river, and all this stuff. And it was really remarkable to watch that stuff back. And then I was thinking about kids these days and what they might think, people who weren't born in that time, looking back at the footage and whether it's as impactful, because it's so impactful to me watching it, because I remember the day. I'm sure everyone does. If you were of a of a ripe age to be able to comprehend what was going on, it was one of the most. It's probably the day I remember the most out of any day in my life.
Yeah,
event wise, according to politics and world events. Yeah.
If you talk to kind of the generation before us, it depends. And obviously I know our audience, we have high schoolers that tune into Real Talk and people in their 80s that are in touch with us. But, you will remember based on your age, like JFK being shot, right? Or you would remember Pearl Harbor, or you'd sort of have these moments. I remember vividly, like just as a young boy, a younger boy anyway, but I remember like the Berlin Wall coming down.
Yeah.
Like, that was a major one that I can think of. But 9/11 sort of seared itself into a lot of people's memory because there hadn't been, that was sort of like the first, like you said, for that generation, that was kind of that first moment where it was like, you're using the word we, like we were under attack. It was like democracy or the United States, our neighbors or what have you.
I remember him saying, they're bombing us. And I just still remember him saying that so vividly in my mind, because it really did feel like that. It felt like North America, the West in general, was under attack. I think before that, the thing I remembered most before 9/11 was Oklahoma City as well. That was just that was a huge event, right?
Yeah, absolutely. People are writing in and sharing their personal memories. Tracy says, I remember that day vividly. Things seemed to be kind of normal, status quo here in Alberta. I thought everything would shut down, but it seemed like nothing changed. That from Tracy. I remember for us, it was such a strange day. We had some friends of mine who are now, geez, how life passes. They were just announcing they had just been married, and we were meeting for a drink, and she didn't order a drink, and then that was the day where they're going to tell us like she's expecting, and now their son is like grown and out of the house, and the marriage has since ended, and life just changes for everybody over the course of 22 years. But I remember that sitting in a spot where we used to like go grab a bite to eat together, and we were one of the only people in there, and this is a pub, and the pub, all the TVs obviously were still on CNN or Fox or whatever channel they had it on with the volume up, like news coverage, full volume in a pub, which is bizarre. I think that's the only time I've ever seen it in my life. Yeah. And I'll never forget that. It was just kind of like a strange experience to be feeling joy for them in a circumstance on a personal level, but shock and sorrow and quite frankly fear and all the other experiences that that millions of people were having around the world.
It's weird you mentioned that too, because I remember that as well. I think I was just 19 or 20 then, and I remember going into a pub too that same week, like a day or two after, and still the news was on. The news was on in like the local watering hole at full volume, right? And I remember driving around with my friends for like a week after, and we'd be listening to, at that time, CDs, music, whatever. All we were listening to was the news. All we were listening to was talk radio. All the stories coming in of the heroes on the one flight that may have taken it down before it reached its destination, and all these things. And it really did feel it's a sad, but it was a strange uniting point. For all of North America at that time.
A good point from Kimberly, who says that not only no social media in 2001, but there wasn't even text messaging. So we were only
Not really.
we were only getting real-time news through the cable outlets, which is a great point. Others of you are sharing, like Aitken says the Mount St. Helens eruption is what jumped out at her. That's kind of the moment that she remembered. Others of you were saying the Reagan assassination attempt. Here's one I really remember. I don't think, well, I wouldn't speak for you, but you're a younger fella.
You always say that.
Well, you would have been like,
younger.
you would have been, what year were you born? When did Challenger explode? 86, I think?
I don't
Someone
remember.
wrote the Challenger explosion.
Yeah.
That I remember that. I think I was in grade 2. I remember that one. That was, and remember there was because we had been paying attention in class ahead of time, celebrating this because there was a Roberta. What was her? I think there was a teacher on board Challenger.
That's right.
She was going up, and she was obviously killed with the rest of them. And so I remember feeling that just as a child, trying to process. I have such a vivid memory. I won't turn this into
Krista
personal.
McCoffey.
Krista
That's
McCoffey.
it, yeah.
Thank you very much. Roberta Bodnar is the female astronaut. Is the astronaut.
No, but I remember that image of her with she had like curly hair. I remember that was plastered everywhere. Yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. Roberta Bondar, Canadian astronaut. That's who I was thinking of.
Oh, okay.
Oh, and by the way, in the other part of her career, she's also a neurologist. Jeez, imagine being her sibling. You're like, what do you do? I work in radio.
Astronauts are never just astronauts.
No, they're never.
Remember when we had, what was her name on here?
You're talking about Katie?
Yeah,
Astro
and
Katie?
she was talking
Katie
about how
Mack?
you have to be like an exceptional pilot to even be an astronaut.
To even
but
be
that-
considered to be it.
But then you're not just that. You're usually always like, a biologist or a scientist or something.
Yeah.
else. Can we talk about peak, Pierre, before we move on?
Sure. You
I
talk
saw
about whatever you
Tawny
like.
make a really good comment there.
Okay.
I feel like we're kind of haven't talked about that. It's still 2 years to the election.
Oh, it's an eternity.
And we have no idea what kind of events, social issues, the Liberals and Trudeau, what they're cooking up. But I really do think he's peaking right now. I really like that comment from
Poilievre?
Tawny. And there could be a fizzle. Like, I agree if there was an election today, it'd be Pierre and Trudeau would be out. But we have 2 years. 2 years is a long time for bad things to happen to the Conservatives and Pierre and mistakes, and for Trudeau and the Liberals to figure something out.
Well, we're not even mentioning the NDP under the leadership
Yeah.
of Jagmeet Singh. I mean, that polling that Shachi took us into last week, the Angus Reid polling, Singh is polling 2 points behind Trudeau. Like he's right there. I hate to say this to audience members that may vote NDP federally speaking, but I just don't, and this is not even meant to be a shot at Jagmeet Singh. It's more a shot just at the party's direction and policy. And I just don't think, just spit it out. I don't think that people take him seriously as an option for prime minister. I can't see. I think Jack Layton, to me, who knows though, maybe I'd be proven wrong, but I just think that Jack Layton was like represented the best chance that party will have in the next number of decades, quite frankly. Maybe I'll be proven wrong, to form government. I just think that too many Canadians feel, and this is based on maybe a small sample size. This is like based on what people write into Real Talk. This is based on what people say to me to my face, as too much of a threat to sort of like the institutions of, I think that people get skittish when they think about what the business landscape might look like. I think I don't think that the federal NDP has done enough to assuage people's fears about what budget deficit might look like, what spending. I think people are under the impression that an NDP government, federally speaking, if you believe that I'm being unfair, email the show, let us, but I think that I just don't think that Canadians are prepared to hand the NDP the bank account.
Yeah.
I just don't think.
I knew you were going to say money.
I think it comes down to money.
Yeah.
I don't think that Jagmeet Singh has said anything that's ridiculous or preposterous any more than the other leaders anyway. I don't think that there's anything about him personally that rubs me the wrong way anyway, but I just think there's something about the perception that people have about that party that for whatever reason, and maybe it is unfair, but for whatever reason, people just don't. Like, look at the way that we have our conversations. We talk about Trudeau and Poilievre, and then we have to intentionally say and sing. Yeah. And like whoever's leading the Green Party, just out of interest of keeping it objective.
Yeah.
But I think that that's too big of a hill to climb, and
Huge.
so then you have people right now that are supporting the NDP that are going to be, if that's 1 out of every 5 voters federally, let's say roughly speaking, ish. Do they believe that the NDP has accomplished enough in its partnership in propping up the Liberals as sort of this quasi-majority government, which it's not.
So now they're tied to them.
But budgets and confidence votes, which is kind of the same thing, pass because the NDP are supporting the Liberals. Will NDP voters give Jagmeet Singh an indication that they believe that they've accomplished enough with that? Part of that will probably be pharmacare, dental care, stuff like that.
And I like how you mentioned housing too, because economists are saying in 2024 we're supposed to get some kind of positive on that landscape. So if housing is the biggest thing to people and that changes and gets better, there could be different outcomes for 2 years from now. Yeah. But it's definitely peak Pierre right now. I like that comment from Tawny.
Great to see former Calgary councillor and former candidate for Calgary Mayor Jeremy Farkas in the live chat this morning. He's going to be joining us this week on our housing roundtable. He says, speaking from personal experience, having such a commanding lead this early is not a good thing. That from Jeremy Farkas. So you'll be hearing more from him on this show this week. Speaking of Angus Reid and Shachi Kurl and the questions that they're asking as part of their polling, we got this message from Gerald. I appreciated this. We wanted to dig into our mailbox today. We're always asking you for emails. That means we got to make time to read some of them, right? Gerald says to me, and we were. I know that I tweeted something, a personal opinion, which is the way that I feel, like it or not. In so many ways, as you may agree with me or disagree on some other things. This last week, I sort of something that Shachi said resonated with me, which is that the majority of Canadians, in talking about policies that New Brunswick and Saskatchewan have implemented, and I suspect other provinces may not be far behind, certainly not all of them, but some of them, including Alberta, wouldn't be surprised. New Brunswick and Saskatchewan says that parents, with the exception in extreme circumstances where a student's well-being may be in danger at home, which is in itself obviously a very sad reality, that parents should be notified if a student changes their pronouns as they're registered in the school system. And if they're under a certain age, 16 or 18 or whatever you believe that the age should be. We can talk about different circumstances. And Shachi talked about where Canadians that were polled by Angus Reid land on this. And the majority of Canadians believe that a parent should be notified. Now, a lesser number believe that the parent should have to approve the change. That, in other words, that the school needs to have parental permission to change it. Should a parent know about it, have a right to know about it, or should a parent have the final say in it? And I think that those are two different, they may be nuanced positions, but I don't see it as that nuanced. I think those are two completely different situations. And that's why I tweeted about it last week. I do think that with the exception of extreme circumstances, that a parent should know. So a parent can provide appropriate supports, know where their kid's at. And again, I think that this is a gray area. And it's an area that makes some people uncomfortable to go on the record. Shachi and I talked about that. Why would a person want to go public on their opinion on this if they know they're going to be ripped to shreds on Twitter or on Facebook or torn apart by people who see it differently than them? People will talk about, whether a kid's participation in a gay-straight alliance at school, whether or not the parent should be notified of it. And the common response to that has simply been, well, parents aren't notified if a kid joins archery club, or a parent's not notified if a kid joins the track team. Well, in a way they are, right? And in a way, kids have parental consent forms or permission forms sent home all the time about things, like a field trip. And someone's going to right now blow me up on social media and say, are you comparing a kid's pronouns and gender identity to going on a field trip, you ignoramus? That's not what I'm saying. I'm just saying that the schools don't operate autonomously outside of parental awareness on issues. And this is one where I think we should have important conversations about it. I also don't think that we should blow this out of proportion and act like the future of the nation rests on this debate. I think we should find somewhere in the middle. But Gerald doesn't believe that Angus Reid was asking the right question at all on the issue. He says, to me, the questions on pronouns are not the questions that need to be asked. Everyone's acting like the school's going to be hiding things from parents. Gerald says, well, now, I don't run a polling business, okay? So I don't know exactly the perfect questions, but they should focus on two specific topics. Number one, if a child informs their school that they wish to use a different pronoun or a different name or identify as a different gender, should the school ask them if their parents are aware before talking to the parents? Interesting question. And number two, if the child says that their parents are not aware and in particular not supportive, how should the school proceed? And that's the whole question. Gerald hits the nail on the head. That's the whole thing. If my child told their school, says Gerald, if they wanted to use a different pronoun, I don't need the school to call me because there's a 99.9% chance that I already know. And if I didn't, and if my child felt unsafe telling me, I'd want them to talk to counselors at the school to help them feel safe telling me if that was the right course of action. Gerald says, we talk a lot about parents' rights. We got to consider children's rights as well. That's a great email from Gerald, and I appreciate it. You remember the conversation that we had with TSN's Claire Hanna and then with Radio Hall of Famer and program director Jackie Rae Greening? The episode is titled, Why Aren't There More Women in Broadcasting? It was about 2 weeks ago that we had this conversation. It was prompted by a bit of a blow-up in our home city of Edmonton as a new sports station launched. And one of the prominent personalities on that radio station, Jason Greger, longtime veteran talk host, told Mark Connolly, another radio host on the CBC, that he didn't think that it mattered, that they didn't have any women on their initial announcement of who's going to be hosting the shows on this new station. And obviously it exploded. Stuff like that always does on social media, maybe even more than in real life, but it prompted a really important conversation. I'm glad that we did that show, that episode. And based on the podcast downloads, you are as well. It resonated with a lot of people. And Lauren wrote in and said, I've been sitting on this for like quite some time. Like we said, the show was about 2 weeks ago. Lauren just sent this in and said, I wanted to see if your interview with Hall of Fame broadcaster Jackie Rae Greening was still pissing me off before I wrote in. And she said, and it is. So after a cooling off period, here's my reaction. What I took from that interview is that her station doesn't need a diversity program because they hire based on merit. And that's what Jackie Rae said to us. She said, for me, I said, Jackie, how do you put a radio roster together? How do you when you're managing a station, what's the number one thing or what are the key things that you consider? And she basically said, for me, she said, it's always been the best person for the job. Lauren says that's a load of crap. Lauren says she sounded like all the white men who told us that they hired and promoted people based on merit through the years in the 70s and the 80s and the 90s and the 2000s, which, of course, is why white men have always been in charge, says Lauren. I was not impressed when she blew off misogyny in the workplace and basically suggested that women need to work hard and just put up with things the way they are. I mean, that's not what Jackie Rae said, but that's how it landed with Lauren. So that's what's important to Lauren. She says that I'm a couple of years older than her. The rampant sexual harassment and discrimination in many places I worked until about the last 10 years was absolutely not okay. And people in positions of management, let alone program directors, should be calling that stuff out, not shrugging it off. And her assertion that hiring based on merit results in a diversity of staff was very interesting. I've never heard that before. And I'd love to see data supporting that statement that would make it even more interesting. But I got to say, says Lauren, as a longtime sports fan, I was disappointed with the overall message to the gals in quotes, of all ages. This old gal was not happy and won't be tuning in. And I also thought, Ryan, that you let her off too easy. What about having somebody on the show to discuss actual research, not anecdotes, that show how merit-based hiring does not result in diversity? I bet there's lots to work with. Lauren says, my reaction to that interview surprised me. Like a lot of times people say stuff that rubs me the wrong way and it just rolls off. But this one just kept rubbing. So nice work, I guess. Not from Lauren. Lauren, we'll take that idea, that fodder. We've actually got some employment experts and workplace experts in our Rolodex, so to speak, that whose opinions I respect. And I do think that would be interesting. And so we'll put that on our working list. This one from Winch. Winch wrote in following our David Parker interview. The Take Back Alberta founder joined us a while ago, and we're still getting, I don't know if you remember, like with the last time we did a show where we got emails like a month after 3 weeks after the fact, still getting emails.
Never.
I think it's like some people, I think it's like they're back at like hockey evaluation camps are going this weekend. The kids are back in hockey. Kids are back in school. There's parents talking again where they've been off for the summer and haven't had that communication.
Yeah.
My guess is that people are starting to say, did you hear Parker on Real Talk? And that's why some people are a little bit late to the party.
The water cooler.
The water cooler. People are back. And so Winch says, I actually appreciated that interview with David Parker. He seems to be the kind of guy that if you start pushing him, like really grinding him, he'd shut you off and then go to his horde of supporters and get them all whipped up. And he said, I appreciate you did it on a Monday, which meant that Adler followed and was allowed to share his open and true views of what David Parker is really like. I thought that 1-2 punch on that show was really good. That's my words, not Winch's. Winch says Parker makes it sound like he has nothing to do with any of the views that his group is pushing, that he just sits back and lets the grassroots decide what direction they're going. Like he is not homophobic. He's just speaking what the grassroots are telling him to say. When he was talking about the role of a real woman being at home, raising kids, doing what God created them to do, he sounded like he'd love the Republic of Gilead, that Margaret Atwood's Handmaid's Tale would actually be a perfect fit for him. And then there's Adler, who paints him as, quite frankly, a scary person. And Winch says, and that's what I think Parker really is, the puppet master. And he says, and my biggest fear is that the UCP caucus, the United Conservatives, the Alberta government essentially, are the puppets. Winch signs off by saying, the other day my son and I, this is kind of a weird back-to-back observation, but he says, my son and I were in a grocery store, and an ad started playing through the speakers, and my son says, that sounds like Jespo. And he says, and all of a sudden we focused and I realized it was you doing a Friesen Brothers read. He says, there's times when I come back from the dog park as well and my son goes, what's going on here? He says, why are you listening to headphones? He says, I'd prefer you don't listen to headphones. So Winch says, I wanted you to know that there's at least one 14-year-old out there who might be a more avid talk show listener than his dad.
Oh, got to be careful.
Love to hear that.
Got to be careful.
Got to be careful.
What we say today.
14's old enough for the realities of life, don't you think?
Every time I'm freezing, I hear you.
Yeah.
Every single time.
Can't get away, buddy.
Every single time.
Can't get away. And this from Curtis, when we say to you, if you have an idea for a show, if you've got something you want us to talk about, send it in. I mean, this is what Curtis did, and this is going to happen. He says, why not yet have we seen a Real Talk roundtable on the housing crisis? And honestly, I read the first sentence of that email and I went, he's right. It's time.
Yeah,
it is time.
It is.
Right? It is. He says, and again, for all the 14-year, your friends are saying this. What am I talking about? He says, things are fucked, says Curtis. Even in Alberta, where, it's hard to wrap your head around what was going on in Ontario and BC, but that storm has landed here too. And higher borrowing rates means higher costs for landlords, which means higher rents, which of course is piling on to the higher housing costs. It's like, he says, so what are the solutions? Curtis says, now I'm in an interesting position because I'm a renter, but I also own rental properties because I wanted to get into the market. Like being a renter can suck, but so can being a landlord. And Curtis says, I'm losing money on my rental properties as it speaks. He says, so and Curtis is using his flamethrower here. So he says, so fuck boomers and also fuck NIMBYs, the Not in My Backyard crews who oppose new housing, and fuck Calgary City Council for that matter for putting a panel together on how to build more housing only to vote against it. I guarantee you Jeremy Farkas will have something to say about that. He says, anyway, Mike Moffat, city planners, builders, who knows? A lot of people probably have better answers than me, but I just wanted to point out that it's only getting worse for everybody who doesn't own a house without a fully paid off mortgage. This issue might even cost Justin Trudeau his job, even though the provinces and cities can do more for housing than he can. Well, that's not what they say, Curtis. They say that if the feds don't take action on this, there's barely anything they can do. But hey, continues Curtis, Trudeau built a pipeline for pickup truck lunatics instead of housing for the young people who voted him in. So what did he think was going to happen? That from Curtis, who's going to get what he asked for, and that's going to be a housing Real Talk roundtable coming up on Friday. We don't have these conversations without Real Talk sponsors, our partners, like the team at Complete Care Restoration. And I wanted to take a second to let you know that if you're dealing with a gut punch right now, if your home or your business has been impacted or even destroyed by fire or flood, this is a situation where you can't mess around. You got to trust the professionals. And securing your home and its contents is the first priority of the team at Complete Care Restoration. They're highly trained in the strategic removal of building materials to allow themselves to neutralize smoke orders and clean the real structure. They've got water damage technicians that understand the importance of cleanup and emergency demolition when things like black mold could come into play. And speaking of mold and asbestos, they've been trained in sampling and analyzing materials to ensure that hazardous substances issues are properly addressed. At Complete Care Restoration, the safety of you and your family and theirs is of utmost importance. You can find them online at completecarerestoration.ca. We spent yesterday evening in our backyard. It's not quite complete exactly yet, but it's to the usable stage, which is such a big moment for us. We had the barbecue out, making smokies, our outdoor space brought to life by the team at Eden Landscaping. Our Wyatt Rudy, he's our 8-year-old. He was playing on that. I got to find out the name for the actual turf because I keep just calling it fake grass.
AstroTurf.
I think that's the brand. That's like jet ski, Kleenex, whatever it is. But this artificial turf that we've got in there is an absolute game changer. And Wyatt's there kicking his soccer ball around, and he turns around and he says to me, "Daddy, this is so much better than we just had dead grass and mud." And I went, "Oh my gosh, I hope that's not how he described our former yard to his classmates at school." But it's true. We had a vision, and Eden Landscaping is bringing it to life. As a full project manager, it meant from start to finish, they're the ones dealing with the issues. We're not having to deal with subcontractors or trades that are held unaccountable. They're great listeners. You can learn more about how they work by checking out landscapeedmonton.ca. Over this weekend, did you have a chance to check out a Dairy Queen in Northwest Edmonton or Sherwood Park? They've got their fall blizzard menu out right now, and I wanted to draw your attention to September's Blizzard of the Month. You can find this at the DQs in Palisades, Nemeo, Newcastle, Westmount, and Baseline Road. They've got a ton of flavors to love. I mean, there's always the classics, Score, Smarties, Oreo, obviously, but every season they bring in some special treats, and that includes September's Blizzard of the Month. That's the pumpkin pie blizzard treat. It's time to check out this pumpkin-flavored goodie. This is the must-do list of anybody that's serious about fall, right? Go in on this classic flavor featuring the world-famous DQ soft serve mixed with real pumpkin pie pieces, garnished with whipped topping and nutmeg, the most quintessential fall spice. It's the pumpkin pie blizzard treat. It's September's Blizzard of the Month at the DQs in Northwest Edmonton and Sherwood Park. Great follow-up comment from Jeremy Farkas in our live chat. He says, of all people that want Jagmeet Singh to get his act together, it's the Conservatives. The Conservative Party of Canada wants Jagmeet Singh to get his act together, and it's true. If he could shave off like 3 to 10% support from the federal Liberals, you imagine how much of an easier road to victory it would be for the Conservatives. That's a great point.
I saw another comment in there about housing market. That was a good point. All these rentals, short-term rentals, these Airbnbs, that's really hurting the market because nobody wants to sell because they can just make money indefinitely forever.
Yeah.
Off their second home or their starter home that they, couldn't sell.
It'd be interesting to do a pro-con list of like Airbnb, Vrbo, like all these short-term rental locations because it's been great for property owners.
Sure.
That are willing to either hire somebody to manage that for them or that are willing to do it themselves. Probably make more revenue. Probably, I would imagine, a significant bigger amount of revenue than you would just by renting the place out longer term. The hotels don't love them, that's for sure.
No.
And we've seen that you remember at the beginning they were getting a pass. It was kind of like there were a lot of similarities between Airbnb and Uber in that, it finally got to the point where powerful lobbies like the hotel associations, and they have different names in every jurisdiction, but essentially demanded that municipalities start charging hotel taxes on short-term rentals because even the tax landscape was completely unfair for hotels.
Yeah.
They were trying to find a way to even out that landscape, but also neighborhoods. Like we were in a short-term rental in Invermere a couple of weekends ago, and we were reading that, it says no one allowed outdoors after a certain time, or it's not quiet. It's not like quiet by 11. Some of these are like no one outdoors after 9 p.m. It's like, you can't say that. You can't do that. But I would imagine if you read between the lines, they've had some kerfuffles with their neighbors.
Yeah.
No, thankfully we are a delightful group of renters. And so, we made sure that we made friends with everybody.
I think the majority of people are good renters.
A lot of, especially sort of the more like, what do you call it? Like the adult housing complexes or the 55 pluses or, some of the nicer retirement communities and things like that. in some cases, and I know people have been challenging condo boards, and there have been some even legal challenges for people willing to spend the money. But some, condo boards, for example, have put in legislation, absolutely no short-term rentals, period.
Yeah.
Because people have become so upset about that. But others have challenged it and found that it's not always within the law to do that, to tell a property owner what they can or can't do with their rental. So,
and the problem too is like the best places to live, the most beautiful places to live. If you're thinking like Florida or California or Vancouver or wherever, downtown Toronto, that's where the most of these short-term rentals are, because that's where you can make the most money indefinitely, right? So those markets where the housing prices are already absolutely insane is where the most of these Airbnbs or short-term rentals are. So, yeah, I was reading a lot about it last week as well, and just being like, because I love Airbnbs compared to hotels. I would rather stay in an Airbnb than a hotel. I would rather have a whole space, when I go to a city or when I go back to Ontario or whatever. But then there's so many downsides, because I'm one of those people who is like, me and my partner would like to buy a house in the next 1 to 2 years. And right now it's impossible.
Yeah, it's impossible. Maybe some hope on the horizon with the direction that interest rates are going, and I mean, at least right now holding the line as opposed to cranking up again. But
they said spring 2023.
Yeah.
Quarter 4 2023, things are going to get better. Now, well, okay, here we are.
And in the meantime, as if I need to tell you, quarter by quarter, you might see a house price go up by 3%
exactly.
or 5%, where it's...
So you're saying now things are bad, but maybe it's good now, because maybe it's going to get way worse, right? So,
yeah. Noob Try Again on the chat says, perhaps there needs to be better incentives and protections for landlords to rent to lower-income renters. Maybe I'm just not aware of what's out there. We'll get into it all this week, and of course, our conversation on that, it's not like one day and one day only. This is something that we'll continue to talk about, and if this does indeed to prove to be over the next couple of years the biggest issue of importance, of relevance, housing, and as many of you are pointing out as well, grocery prices too, then that's what we're going to keep talking about. You can send us an email anytime to talk@ryanjesperson.com. Coming up later this week, wanted to let you know in particular on Thursday, we've confirmed Mo Amir, he's going to be the host of he is the host, not going to be, of This Is Van Color, and he's going to join us on Thursday. He says that the city of Vancouver needs to adopt a new motto. He says that the city of, can I say it? His motto he thinks for the city of Vancouver, fuck you, I got mine. And so... I'm not sure they're going to take his advice, but we'll get into it. We wrap up every Monday's episode thanks to our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. You can get a free solar quote today at kubyenergy.ca with something outside of the news cycle, something that's not dominating the headlines, and probably because it's something that might make you feel pretty good on a Monday. It'll restore your faith in humanity. It'll fill your cup. We call it Positive Reflections. And this is a story out of, this is a Guernsey. Have you heard of Guernsey? It's like, it's just off the French coast. It's a British island in the English Channel. And a gal by the name of Tessa Legayes, she had lost her chain. She lost her chain when she was frolicking in the water off the island of Guernsey. But here's why this matters most. The chain held a collection of her late family's rings. Like not just one, but multiple rings from family members, beloved family members who had passed. And so she was devastated, as you might be. And so she called a guy by the name of Matthew Kneebone. He's a metal detectorist. He's uses a metal detector as a hobby, but people call him because of his reputation. In past, he's been able to help people reunite with their lost items. And so 2 weeks, Johnny, 2 weeks after she lost her bracelet with these rings, Mr. Kneebone went to the same area she'd been swimming. He got out his metal detector, and guess what? He got all of the rings back. And they weren't even all attached to the chain still. But he stayed out there. She was with him. He stayed out there till he found them. Can you imagine, like, tides coming in and out, water washing around, sand, sea life, all of the things that could have happened. But she got them all back, including a wedding ring, and says it is so important for me. Ms. Legayes, she contacted reporters and journalists, and some of the British news outlets have been covering this. If you're watching on YouTube, an amazing photo of the two of them hugging. You can imagine the emotion she would feel. She says, Mr. Kneebone, and they're calling each other by these formal names, she says he's such a selfless man. He didn't even charge her. She says he does this for no rhyme or reason. He does it for free, apart from the fact that he enjoys reuniting people with their priceless heirlooms. Look at that. I love that. So be a Mr. Kneebone today. Find a way that you can for no benefit to yourself other than the feeling it gives you, feeling good, helping somebody out. Do something for your fellow citizen. Maybe leave a note under the wiper blade of somebody. Could be a complete stranger. I don't know, maybe help weed somebody's front garden if it looks like it's getting out of control and maybe they're dealing with something in their personal life. Maybe drop off a note in somebody's mailbox, or maybe tell somebody on the street walking their dog that you appreciate them. I don't know, whatever it is. Let's do something on this Monday that creates our own positive reflection. And if you experience something like this and you think Real Talkers would love to hear about it, you know where to find us. You can check out the Connect link at ryanjesperson.com. Positive Reflections is presented by our friends at Kuby Renewable Energy. Make it a great Monday, friends. Thanks for listening to this episode of Real Talk, and we'll see you again Tuesday.
Real Talk is hosted by Ryan Jesperson. Executive producer Josh Dunford. Technical producer